Trails West in Plain English, made by Caleb Peterson, Brendan Volker, Taylor Pearson, and David Lynn. We know that there may be some people that do not understand how civilization came to be in the West. It's simple. First, the U.S. bought all of the Louisiana Territory in 1803. Then, we gained half of Oregon country that we had been arguing with Great Britain about, but resolved with splitting it in half. As the U.S. gained more and more land, they started sending explorers to explore what kind of land that we had bought. Once the explorers came back, word got around that the land in the west was great. And even though the explorers couldn't find the Northwest Passage that would grant settlers safe access to Oregon Territory, they did create the beginnings of the trails that led west. So, the first people who set out on these trails were the fur trappers. One day, a trapper by the name of Jedediah Smith was out hunting when he heard from Native Americans about a slim path that was a relatively safe pass through the mountains into Oregon Territory. Smith and his men set out and found this path to be a perfect valley through the Rocky Mountains. Word spread, and the missionaries were the first people to act.
Missionaries like the Whitmans and the Spaldings went out to teach the Nez Perce about Christianity and the Bible. Starting in St. Louis, they set out on the Oregon Trail, moving to Oregon. When they reached Oregon, they split up, Spaldings going to Nez Perce and the Whitmans going to another group of Indians, the Coyotes. Neither of them did very well at converting the Indians to Christianity. The Whitmans in particular. In fact, a great many of Indians died from diseases passed on from the missionaries. But Marcus Whitman did succeed in making Oregon sound like a pioneer's paradise. In fact, he led a large group of American settlers into Oregon in 1842. And all of the missionaries' most important legacy was opening up the West to the settlers. And one group of these settlers would be the pioneer women.
Many women were wives or mothers, but some of them were single, setting out to look for a better life and a husband. The women faced the same challenges the other settlers faced along the trails. Hot deserts, cold winters, mountains, bugs, starvation, and many others. But they also, after a long day of walking or riding in a wagon, were expected to do the same chores they did normally, like cook and wash the clothes. The hardships of the trails brought out the tough side of the woman, and they were seen in a new way. For example, Annie Bidwell moved to Chico, California, and taught Indians how to read and write, while convincing Chico officials to build their first church. Also in 1869, women were given the right to vote in the Wyoming Territory, and by 1900, 3 other territories had joined in. Pioneer women led the way to more equality, and this was their greatest legacy.
Mormons were also part of the mass migration to the West, but instead of settling in Oregon, they decided to settle in a vast dry basin in the Utah where there weren't many other people around. That was the main reason they settled there. See, Mormons were a group of Christian people, but had different views on Christianity than other Christians. Mormons taught teachings that others were offended by, like polygamy, which is a practice of having more than one wife. Because others were offended by the Mormons, it didn't accept their views. They were persecuted wherever they went. After a group of people attacked and killed Joseph Smith, the man who founded the Church of the Latter-day Saints in 1844, the Mormons set out on their way to get away from persecution. On their way to Utah, the Mormons planted crops and set up shelters along the side of the trail for others who would follow. They made their way to Salt Lake City, Utah, and settled there without the fear of persecution.
There were also more people still at that time who were traveling trails. But unlike the others who were traveling the Oregon and Mormon Trail, instead of settling down, these people were fur trappers who were intent on getting rich. These people were led by a man named William Becknell into Mexico on a trail called the Santa Fe Trail. after Mexico was opened to American traders in 1821. Becknell traveled on a trail later known as the Santa Fe Trail because it starts in Independence, Missouri, goes through Louisiana Territory, and ends up in Santa Fe. When Becknell got to New Mexico, the Mexicans were eager to buy his new merchandise, so they bought the cloth, the hardware, and the china from him. After Becknell first traded in Santa Fe and people saw that traders could get rich by trading it in New Mexico, many others soon followed on the trail with the hope of getting rich. The next spring, Becknell headed back to Santa Fe, but since he hadn't put his goods into covered wagons and could not travel through the pass through the mountains that he had used in his earlier traveling, he decided to use a cutoff that he had found that goes through a desert in the south instead of going up and down steep slopes like in the mountains. As Becknell's water supply dwindled down to nothing, he became crazed by thirst and killed their dogs and chopped off their mules' ears to drink their blood. Close to death, he found a stream that quenched his immense thirst and allowed him to reach Santa Fe alive. He returned home with a humongous profit, and not long after, hundreds of travelers were braving the desert to travel from Missouri to New Mexico each year.
Of course, on any of the trails, life was not easy. The Donner Party is a good example of some of the hardships the pioneers had to face. The Donner Party was made up of people from Illinois and Iowa, all from different families. Although most were from the Donner family and the Reed family. They set out on California Trail and reached Fort Bridger. The party split up. One trying out a new trail said to cut 2 weeks off the travel, but they didn't know it was real longer than the one they're going to take before. The food supply was very low after crossing the salt flats by Great Salt Lake. And in October, a wheel of the wagon broke, and they had to stop for a day and trying to fix it. But that night it snowed. Tracking the party at the lake is now called Donner Lake. In the Sierra Nevada, disease, severe frostbite, and starvation are the main problems the party suffered from. And they believed that after so many had died, the remaining members gave in to cannibalism to survive. After much suffering, the party was finally rescued from an expedition from Sacramento Valley, which is only about half of the original party remaining.
The trails west led to many deaths, but they helped expand the United States out west and created better lives for American settlers that made it there. Even with all the hardships, the settlers pushed on with their belief of manifest destiny leading them through the trails. The trails were tough, but the settlers' willpower to find a better life out west led them on. And that's the Trails West in plain English.
We used a History Alive book and also created an America book for our research.